So, in this episode, we are going to talk about the humanoid priests of Peru. And we are going to dive deep into not only what were the origins of the Inca civilization, who were the Inca, but we're going to look into who were these elongated skulled humanoids that predated the Inca, whose skulls have since been found all over Peru, especially in the Paracas region. Who were these entities? Where did they come from? And what were they doing in Peru? And my guess is that in this episode, you are going to learn some things about these skulls and these humanoids you've probably never heard before, so do not miss this. But first, let me tell you about an epic expedition we have planned for March of 2026, and I'm talking about our Israel and Petra tour, March 15th through the 23rd, 2026. Join me and so many friends that are coming for the adventure of a lifetime, a Middle East expedition to explore the vast history and mysteries of ancient Israel and Petra. Experience the Bible come alive in 3D, from Mount Hermon in northern Israel, where the Watchers descended, to the Sea of Galilee, where Christ walked on water, to the City of David in Jerusalem, as we explore the subterranean Western Wall tunnels to behold its massive megalithic foundations. This will be an Israel tour unlike any other. And for those doing the Jordan extension, our journey will then take us to one of the 7 wonders of the world, the mysterious rock city of Petra, where we will explore its chambers and consider the ancient technology used to construct it. And now through April 30th, you can lock in our super early bird price of $2,750 by using code STARGATE1. That's capital S, STARGATE1. And this price includes virtually everything except your international flight to Israel. To learn more, to see the detailed itinerary, to save your spot, just click the link in the show notes below or go to stargatevoyager.com/tours. Okay, let's talk about the humanoid priests of Peru. Now, to set this up, we first need to talk about the Inca civilization a bit. Now, the Inca civilization officially rose sometime in the early 13th century, and it included 17 Inca rulers, and it lasted from the year 1200 to the year 1533. However, the first 8 Inca rulers are considered by many to be legendary kings because their existence is mixed with mythology. They were said to have descended from the sun god, and they held great power over the people of the empire. But according to the mainstream timeline, 1438 marks the official start of the empire when Pachacutec began to rule. The Incas considered their king to be the Sapa Inca, or to be the son of the sun. The Inca Empire was called Tawantinsuyu by its subjects, which is Quechuan for the realm of the 4 parts, and it was the largest empire in pre-Columbia America. Now, the administrative, political, and military center of the empire was in the city of Cusco, the Puma City. If you do a Google search of Cusco and put in the word Puma, you'll see that it's basically in the shape of a puma. And according to historical data, it was the Inca Emperor Pachacutec who began to rebuild the city into the shape of a puma in 1438. Now, the puma is a very ancient symbol of the Andean region, I believe going back to the megalithic builders, otherwise known as the Hanan Pacha, who would literally embed the symbol of the puma into their temples and into their very walls. There's even a specific spot in one of the greatest megalithic walls downtown Cusco where you can see what looks like a puma that was embedded, built into this wall by the way they place certain stones. And if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify, you're probably going to see a photo or video of this now. Now, the Spanish began the conquest of the Inca Empire in 1532. This was shortly after what's known as the Inca Civil War. And this is when the last Sapa Inca or emperor of the Inca Empire was captured. He was killed on the orders of Conquistador Francisco Pizarro, marking the beginning of Spanish rule. The remnants of the Inca Empire retreated to the remote jungles of Vilcabamba and established the small Neo-Inca state, which was conquered by the Spanish later in 1572. It's important to note that while the term Inca nowadays is translated as mostly ruler or lord, in Quechua, this ancient language, the term Inca does not simply refer to the king, but also to the Inca nobles. So in this sense, Inca meant nobility. And the nobles were actually a small percentage of the total population of the empire, probably numbering, experts say, anywhere between 15,000 to like 30,000 nobles, or the elite, but they ruled a population around 10 million. Again, the word Inca does not refer to the general population, but to the highest class of society. And this class protected their royal bloodlines by breeding with each other. The Peruvian monarchs availed themselves to the right of polygamy to a very liberal extent, leaving behind families of sometimes 1 to even 200 children. Now, the Inca and most other Central and South American cultures, such as the Maya, the Aztec, they worshipped these plumed serpent deities. And to the Inca, they called this deity Viracocha, who they believed basically created all living things and whose name translates as sea foam. And it's thought to have emerged from Lake Titicaca. Viracocha is. So Viracocha and these plumed serpent deities were not just worshipped as like distant gods, but they were actually credited with the founding of these civilizations. They were credited with giving secret knowledge and even living amongst the ancient inhabitants and teaching them occult sciences before departing over the sea, at least with Viracocha. And according to the legends of the Inca, Viracocha manifested basically as a bearded, white-skinned entity or human with blue eyes. Now, the Inca were big on human sacrifice. When an Inca died, that is an emperor or a noble, a large quantity of his plate, that is his possessions and his jewels, were buried with him. And this could even include a number of his servants, attendants, and favorite concubines, which often amounted to hundreds, if not even thousands, that were slain and buried with him. As many as 4,000 servants, court officials, and concubines were killed upon the death of the Inca Huayna Capac in 1527. And the Inca also performed child sacrifice around important events of theirs, such as the death of a Sapa Inca or during a famine. Now, historian William Prescott, who lived in the mid-1800s and who wrote probably one of the foremost histories regarding the conquest of Peru, which is the title of his book, The Conquest of Peru, he makes a very interesting statement based on all of his reading and all of his history into the Inca culture, into the conquest of Peru, everything he pulled from the Spanish chroniclers. He writes this in his book. Quote, "We may reasonably conclude that there existed in the country a race advanced in civilization before the time of the Incas, and in conformity with nearly every tradition, we may derive this race from the neighborhood of Lake Titicaca, a conclusion strongly confirmed by the imposing architectural remains which still endure." End quote. So Prescott is writing this in the 1800s, long before the mainstream hive mind censored version of history that we have today. And he's basically cluing us in on what the Spanish chroniclers had written before him and the Inca had written before them. That before the time of the Inca was a lost civilization who had something to do with building these megalithic marvels that were created with what I believe is lost ancient technology that you can see all over Peru. So, who were these other ancient civilizations? Well, we know already that the Inca Empire was preceded by at least two large scale empires in the ancient Andean region. You've got what some call the Tiwanaku culture or civilization that lived around Lake Titicaca there in Bolivia circa 300 to 1100 AD. And then we have the Wari culture or the Wari, which existed around 600 to 1100 AD. And they were centered near the area of Ayacucho. And then the Wari occupied the Cusco area for about 400 years. Therefore, many of the characteristics of the Inca Empire derived from earlier multi-ethnic and expansive Andean culture. So to these earlier civilizations may be owed many of the accomplishments that are credited to the Inca, but I believe there's even earlier civilizations, and let's get into that now. Now, in the 1920s, Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello first discovered tombs in Paracas, Peru, filled with skeletons that possessed some of the largest elongated skulls found on Earth. Since then, many more skulls from this region have been discovered, which are usually believed to date between anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 years old. Now, skeptics always cry that these are just the result of cradle headboarding or cranial deformation, where the ancient people would take the infant and basically put its head between these boards and squeeze it, which after enough time would reshape it. Now, this certainly did happen with many skulls, as I'll explain. There are two different types of skulls found amongst the Paracas. There are the cradle headboarded skulls, which was the general population who were trying to emulate or look like their elite rulers. And these elite rulers are the skulls that we call the natural elongated skulls. And these are the ones that feature the crazy anatomical genetic differences. These were the nobles, the royalty of the Paracas culture. As you can see in this photo, when you compare side by side an ancient cradle headboarded skull against a natural ancient elongated skull, you see that they are completely different. The natural elongated skulls are much larger. They've got larger jawbones than the normal human skulls. They're also often missing the sagittal suture. This is the fibrous connective tissue joints between the two parietal plates that run down the center back of normal human skulls. And on average, I would say that on these elongated natural skulls, the cranial volume is probably 25% larger than conventional human skulls. And a few skulls, such as the Chongo skull at the Icke Museum, it's got much more cranial mass than a normal skull. The Chongo skull might have 50% more cranial mass, but there's many that would have 40, 35, 30% more cranial mass. And as I always state when talking about this topic, the key is cranial deformation or cradle headboarding certainly can change the shape of one's skull, but it cannot in no way add more cranial volume or more cranial mass to a skull. And this is exactly what we see on these natural elongated skulls, is not just a different shape, but much more cranial mass. And what's more, the foramen magnum, it's the hole in the bottom of our skulls where the neck attaches. And it is located at the balance point in the center bottom of, again, a normal skull. But on these natural elongated Paracas skulls, if you flip it over, you'll see that the hole for the neck is at the back bottom of the skull, which tells me that this is totally genetics. If the neck is attaching at a different place only on the natural elongated skulls. Now, these hybrids who had the natural elongated skulls were on the diminutive side. They were 4 to 4.5 to 5 feet tall, I think, on average. Now, several years ago, this shocking specimen was discovered in Paracas, and this is a mummy that existed approximately 800 BC. So this is one of the older ones. And as you can see, if you're watching by way of YouTube or Spotify, it's got a huge elongated skull. But here's the key. This one was a newborn. This is a newborn mummy. And you can see the mouth on it is incredibly tiny, but the eyes appear to be quite large. But the skull is absolutely huge for a newborn. But again, this specimen, what's important about it is that it proves that these were not just cradle headboarded as infants. These were being born with huge elongated skulls. There was another very strange and mummified head unearthed by the locals in a cemetery in Paracas, Peru, some time ago, many years ago. This one's got very strange eyes, this deep crease line that rounds the top center of the head. From the side profile, it almost appears to have like a snout-like point. But then from its front view, you can see what appears to be a human-like mouth, lips, and even tongue. In 2010, about an hour south of Cusco, Peru, in a graveyard on a mountain was one of the most famous hybrid humanoids, as I call them, that was ever discovered in Peru, and it's known as Waiki. And this entity died approximately 900 years ago, but when it was alive, it was about 2 or 3 years old, I believe. Now, as you can see from the photos here of Waiki, its elongated skull is massive. Its torso is smallish. If you've seen it up close like I have in real life, it's got long arm bones that appear longer than normal. And pay attention to the large hole that's in the top of its head. We're going to circle back to the hole in the head. Okay, so now let's try to connect some of these dots. Let's go back to the Inca. The Inca's most sacred and prized possessions were the bodies and the heads of these deceased humanoids, of these mummies. In fact, the great Inca Civil War that I mentioned earlier, which is also known as the War of the Two Brothers, which took place in the 1530s, this war essentially started over which ruling brother got to keep which mummies. And the Inca called these mummies Mallkis, which basically means mummy. Now, all over Peru and the Cusco area, we can see these precision megalithic cutouts. And I often feature videos and reels and shorts of these on my YouTube channels and Instagram. And these look almost like altars, but I believe they were actually made ages before the Inca by the Hanan Pacha, which is a Quechuan word which basically means the lost megalithic engineers of Peru. So the Inca found these later and basically repurposed them as altars, and the Inca called them huacas. And this is where they would venerate and worship the Mallkis, or the elongated skulled mummies. Now, during the winter solstice of December 21st and the summer solstice of June 21st, this is when the Inca basically considered the portals and the spiritual gates to be activated or open by the Orion Belt. And so these were the high holy days to the Inca, where they would come to the huacas with their most prized sacred possessions, which were these Mallkis, and they would place these elongated skulled heads or the mummies, the whole bodies, into the huaca, which they also considered to be a portal, and they would do so to communicate with the gods. And according to oral traditions, the dead mummy on these solstice days would become animated in a zombie-like state, and the ancient spirits would actually speak through the mummies to the Inca. Now, this is not only what the Inca legends say, but this is even what some documents by the Spanish chroniclers state. Whether these Spanish chroniclers happen to see this actually take place on a solstice day in the last remaining days of the Inca, or whether the Inca just told them about it, I'm not certain, but we do have some documents where Spanish chroniclers talk about this is what they were told or what they saw. Now let's take this even deeper. According to oral traditions, some of the very special humanoid hybrids would have had gold artifacts surgically inserted into the tops of their elongated skulls while they were fully alive in order to help them better connect with the gods. So these entities were even considered oracles to communicate with the gods. So, from what we know, these humanoids with the elongated skulls were living in Peru as far back as 3,000 years ago. Now, other researchers like Brian Forster, L.A. Marzulli, if you look into some of the research they did with the DNA testing, these Paracas humanoids, they say, came from the Black Sea region of Crimea, way over there by kind of Siberia and Russia, where all kinds of other large elongated skulls have been found. But there was this large concentration of them in the Paracas region about 3,000 years ago. And when you look at these mummified heads there in Paracas, they all have this dark red hair. Now, what's interesting is, again, Inca was the elite of the population. It wasn't the general population. Well, guess what? The elite of the Inca often had dark red hair, and some of them had elongated skulls that look very natural to my eye. And what's more, according to legend, and this is coming straight from the legend keepers that I work with in Peru, who are tour guides, who speak Quechuan, who are the wisdom keepers and know all the legends. They state that living up until even the time of the Incas, in the 1400s and 1500s, we're talking, were a small grouping of these elongated skulled humanoids that were alive. Again, this is according to the Incas' own oral traditions. These hybrid humanoids were considered the highest priest class and the scientists during the time of the Inca. They were considered the demigods. Okay, so the point I'm trying to hammer home here is that in the 1400s and the 1500s, we had what the mainstream calls the Inca civilization, who gets credited with building the megaliths and all that. As I've stated earlier, the Inca were really only the royalty and the elite rulers during that time. And their most prized possessions were these 1,000-year-old plus humanoid heads and mummies of this older group. Yet, at the same time, there was still a small contingent of these humanoids that were alive in the 1400s and 1500s that walked amongst the Inca, as the mainstream narrative would call them, if that makes sense. And one of the proofs I believe we have for this is this structure here that you're going to see right now if you're watching by way of video on YouTube or Spotify. And this is at a site called Napa Iglesia in the Sacred Valley of Peru. It's not too far from Machu Picchu. And this is the infamous megalithic cave I've talked about on previous episodes that is in a very remote area. Halfway up a mountainside is this huge cave, and inside the cave is this megalithic precision 3D portal in what looks like a console or altar at the front of the cave. So nobody was bringing power tools up here to make this. And these are precision cut, very hard andesite stone. The Inca only had copper tools. There's no way their softer tools could have precision made these. The point is, this cave was made by the Hanan Pacha, the earlier megalithic builders of Peru. But what you're going to see is this structure here. If you leave this megalithic cave that I just described and you go left, you're going to see this structure. And as you can see, this structure clearly is not megalithic. It's made with small rough stone and mortar mixed together. This is classic Inca construction. Yet what do you notice when you see this photo? I've got my friend Richard that I told to stand next to the entrance so that you could see the scale. Richard is probably 6 foot tall, and you'll notice he couldn't fit through that door if his life depended on it. It looks like this structure was made for a 4-foot tall max entity. And last time that I was here at this site, I asked my good friend and renowned guide Rumi, again, who's a native of Peru and knows all the ancient legends. I asked him, tell me about this small structure. And he literally said, well, this was a residence for the caretakers of this site. And he went on to tell me the caretakers of this site were the living Mallkis. It was these hybrid humanoid priests who took care of this far older site that was made in prehistory. And during the solstice times, the Inca would come up to the mountain in the cave, and these hybrid humanoid elongated skulled priests would literally lead them in worship and into their occult practices. But the big takeaway here is we have this older megalithic site with a structure that was dated during the time of the Inca, made with Inca construction methods, that's non-megalithic, but made for 4-foot entities. So this is the forbidden history you never learned about in school. This is the forbidden history you never read about in so-called history books, that as recent as 500 years ago, there was still a race of hybrid humanoids with elongated skulls living on planet Earth in Peru amongst the Inca. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please do me a favor and share it with a friend or two or many. And while you're at it, please subscribe to this podcast from wherever you like to watch or listen. And while you're at it, if you can, give me a 5-star rating, especially on Spotify or Apple. That helps me to break through the algorithms, climb the charts, and reveal our forbidden history to more people. Again, if you're interested in our Israel or Petra tour next year, or the Cambodia tour to Angkor Wat we've got coming up this November in 2025, just click the link in the show notes or go to stargatevoyager.com/tours. And until next time, keep exploring.